We're looking at Psalm 59th Psalm this morning. Just a little word of reminder. Next week, we will be skipping to lesson 12. And maybe we'll try to incorporate a little bit of lesson of the next of this, what is it, 77, I think, is lesson 11. But it has some similarities to some of the ones that we've looked at, including today. So just, at least in general, the idea of crying out to God in a time of trouble. So that's the one I chose to sort of get us back on track. So next week we'll be at lesson 12, back on track. And our books will be available as well for the next quarter, looking at some things in the life of Jesus. And then after that, we'll be back in the Psalms for the second part of the Psalms. The Bible is filled with various statements about deliverance. Think about Jacob being delivered, praying for deliverance from Esau in Genesis 32. In that scary time for Jacob, because his brother was kind of a scary man, and he thought he was going to put an end to him. He wanted God to deliver him, and providentially God had already been, it seems, working on that situation to help Jacob, to help Jacob in his seeming danger from Esau. The Israelites being in danger from their enemies all around. Deuteronomy 7, and promises there for deliverance. Later on, it was promised to the children of Israel that whoever would forsake their false gods would be protected from the Philistines, or delivered rather from the Philistines. Put away your false gods, renounce your idolatry, and I will deliver you from the threat of the Philistines. Jeremiah was promised protection from the Israelites. Sadly, it's sad that he even needed protection from the Israelites, his own people. But he was, nevertheless, God said, I am going to be with you, and I will not let them, they did harm him in a lot of ways, but I will not, your life will not be in danger, will not be jeopardized because of them. I will deliver you from their hand, which he did on multiple occasions in multiple different ways. One of the most familiar examples of God's willingness to help his people is found in Daniel chapter 3. The three friends of Daniel. If you remember, you probably remember their Babylonian names more so than their real names, but we call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they may be the poster children of how God can deliver his people. In Daniel 3, whenever they were thrown in that fiery furnace that was burning, pretty much as hot as it could go, and nevertheless, they were not burned. Their clothes were not burned. Their hair didn't even burn. In fact, they didn't even smell like smoke. But they were delivered by God. And they knew that God could deliver them if he wanted to, and he showed that he did. In the New Testament, Jesus taught his followers to pray for deliverance from, according to some versions, based on the Greek New Testament, from the evil one. Deliver us from the evil one. So, in his model prayer, he said, lead us not into temptation, deliver us from the evil one. So deliverance is something that we ought to pray for. Paul promised deliverance from temptation would be available any time a Christian is tempted. There will be the availability of being delivered from that temptation to avoid the sin in 1 Corinthians 10:13. So these and so many other things show us that God's deliverance, whereas in the Old Testament it was almost always depicted in a physical way. Jacob was physically delivered from Esau. And Jeremiah was physically delivered from the Hebrews, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were physically delivered from that fire. But we see spiritual as well in the lessons there and in the New Testament as well. Praying deliverance from the evil one is a spiritual deliverance. It can be a physical deliverance, depending on what the temptation is, but it's also a spiritual deliverance, and God's protection and His help certainly goes beyond physical. Think about Paul talking about the whole armor of God. Put on the whole armor of God to help you against the devil. That's all spiritual, all those things, except for unless you count the Word of God as physical, which it kind of is physical, but it's even more so spiritual. Well, in our lesson text this morning, which is Psalm 59, the 46th Psalm attributed to David, by the way, David cries out for deliverance, help from God. According to the superscription, if you look at it, it says, it is of David when Saul sent men to watch his house in order to kill him. If you want to make a little note in your Bible, which I would highly recommend, you can write out beside that 1 Samuel 19, because that's what that is. So Psalm 59, 1 Samuel 19. That's my favorite part of these superscriptions is when it tells us this happened, or this is referring to something that is also recorded in the Old Testament. And this is one of those rare occasions, 1 Samuel 19. That occasion whenever Saul was trying to kill, one of the times I should say, Saul wanted to kill David, and he ran away. He got away, but it wasn't so easy. It wasn't such a simple escape. He was more or less trapped. And we'll see. Well, actually, we'll just look right now. He tried to pin him to the wall with his spear as David was up there playing his ancient guitar, is basically what it was. He runs off, goes home. It says in verse 10, David fled and escaped that night. But then it got even worse, because Saul sent men to David's house to surround it, basically watch it. And the plan was, kill him in the morning. When he comes out, remember also he was the king's son-in-law at this time. He was married to Michal, Saul's daughter. Watch the house, and when he comes out, you kill him. Pretty desperate situation, isn't it? He gets away from Saul. He goes home. But I guess before he could even do anything else, now, how could he possibly escape whenever he's got men around the house waiting for him to come out? So what we're told, and it probably doesn't mean that he wrote it that night. Maybe he did, I don't know. I highly doubt that. But probably in retrospect and hindsight, he wrote it about that time, referring back to that night. But maybe, the seeds of it, or the spirit of it was formulated, that very night as he prayed to God probably and needed help. So he desperately needed God's help. God was his only hope. And thanks to the superscription there, we know that this psalm is directly, specifically about that very occasion. So it's one of those times where we don't have to say, maybe it was about this and it would apply to this, but it actually literally was specifically referring to that time in David's life in recorded in 1 Samuel 19. So the psalm begins. We'll wait and see how that story ends as we look at the psalm first. Deliver me from my enemies, O my God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from those who work evil, and save me from bloodthirsty men. For behold, they lie in wait for my life. Fierce men stir up strife against me. For no transgression or sin of mine, O Jehovah. For no fault of mine, they run and make ready. Awake, come to meet me and see. Kind of sounds like Job a little bit, doesn't it? In that Job made the same argument to God and to his friends. This has been happening to me for no fault of my own. I don't know why this is happening. Well, David is in a similar situation as far as externally. These people are coming after me even though I haven't done anything. So God, I want you to come and see that this is the case, that this is true. That's kind of what Job was saying. I wish I could go to God and tell Him and plead my case. David just sort of flips it backwards and says, God, come and you'll see. Cast your eye over here to me. You'll see that this is true. Yeah, Dean?
Well, the thing is, we know that God knows everything, but yet He wants us to ask and for Him to do this. And it really, David had to ask not to look down. God already knew what was going on. He didn't have to, but we know that that's what, in one sense, God wants us to ask Him for the things that we need. He knows what we need, but yet He requires and wants us to ask Him for those needs. Just like there was David. David knows that God is there, and God knew that, but yet God wants us to, ask Him.
Yeah. Yeah, turn to Him. That's what David's doing. And you could say it was partly because there was no one else he could turn to, literally. But at the same time, David understood there was no one better to turn to, even if there were people he could turn to. There was one other person. It was his wife. Hint, hint. Okay, she may or may not play a role in this. But David, he's not saying he was perfect. He's not sinless. And he knows that. His point is, I haven't done anything to warrant this. I haven't done anything for them, and most especially him, the king, to be coming for me. Like, what have I done except played the lute or the lyre for him to soothe him in his bad moods or whatever? What have I done? Nothing. So I don't know why they're doing this. So, since I'm innocent, the implication would be, if I had done something, then I have no right to cry out for deliverance, is sort of the unspoken implication. And that's why he says, God, look and see that I'm innocent, so that you will help me. I haven't done anything to bring this about, so I need your help. Is God going to allow them to overcome him, considering he's innocent? David thinks not. He would not do that. So he says, you, Jehovah, God of hosts, are God of Israel. Rouse yourself to punish all the nations. Spare none of those who treacherously plot evil. Each evening they come back, howling like dogs and prowling about the city. There they are, bellowing with their mouths, with swords in their lips, for who, they think, will hear us? He opens it up a little bit in perspective to evil people in general, the nations. All those who treacherously plot evil. It's one thing you could say there are those who do evil, but that's almost a different class than those who treacherously plot evil, isn't it? Because, and I don't mean to diminish evil, but exactly the opposite, to amplify how much worse it is for people who are maliciously and treacherously planning to do evil. Even God made that distinction in the old law of, it's an unintentional sin, like if you accidentally hurt somebody or even killed them, it's different than if you plotted to murder them and you go and, you make this plan and you maliciously set out to do that. We have that distinction in our law too. Premeditated is a different class of crime, which has a different punishment, rightly so. Those who treacherously plot evil are among the most wicked people on earth. Sadly, Saul was one of them at this time, during this time of his life. And even those who followed him or blindly did whatever he said. He says, he compares them to dogs. Says they're like dogs. Dogs were viewed a lot differently to them than they are to us. Because we generally view dogs as a precious commodity. Generally speaking. Most people like dogs, unless they've had some sort of childhood trauma, okay? Most people like dogs. Because when you think of a dog, you think of a little cute little household pet, maybe not little, maybe a very large pet that's still loving and man's best friend. But in Israel, especially in ancient Israel, they were not pets. They were like wild dogs, scavengers they were vicious and like the book says, or quoting, they were vicious and dangerous scavengers. They would show up, especially at night, and, you just didn't know what they might do because they were wild, undomesticated, dirty, mean things. Maybe more like raccoons to us. And sometimes they look cute, till you get close to one. And you see how not cute they are. Because suddenly you realize this is the meanest, nastiest, most vicious thing I've ever seen. But what raccoons do is similar to what they would view dogs. They prowl around at night. They get into pretty much anything. And if you come close to it, it's going to lash out at you. So David says they're like dogs, prowling about the city, howling. So just think of David in that house. The men outside are not literally howling like dogs. But as an illustration, it's like that's what it's like. They're there waiting, lying in wait. They think, hey, who's going to stop us? Who's going to hear us? We can do whatever we want. He says they have swords in their lips. Anybody's version say something different than that in verse 7? Swords in their lips. It says what? They say insults. Okay, they're saying cruel things. It's a good example of how interpretive, these paraphrase, easy-to-read versions are. But, yeah, that's the idea. It reminds me of Jeremiah 18:18, when Jeremiah said, he said, the people that are coming after me say, come, let's make plots against Jeremiah, and let us strike him with the tongue. Or smite him with the tongue. Let's strike him with the tongue. Well, what does it mean to strike somebody with your tongue? They're going to go up and lick him? Okay. All manner of vicious slanders against somebody. Or in this case, I guess slander was part of it because he was innocent, and they by implication, even if they didn't say anything, by implication they were coming to get him for something he hadn't done or for nothing that he had done. So there's that. But also they may have actually been saying things, but the idea is they are vicious. Even their mouths are used as weapons, and like dogs, howling, growling, barking.
In today's world, you might see them use as hate speech.
Yeah.
They just want to spew out stuff's not even right and
Yeah.
slam somebody else.
Yeah, true hate speech, actual hate speech, because they're actually saying things about this man that aren't true and that are laced with personal hate against that person. Ruining his reputation, if nothing else, but they're not even trying to ruin his reputation per se. They're trying to end his life. They don't want him to live anymore. Well, the king doesn't want him to live anymore, and they are his minions. So, deliver me from my enemies. He goes on then, and he says, but you, O Jehovah, laugh at them. You hold all the nations in derision. O my strength, I will watch for you. For you, O God, are my fortress. My God in His steadfast love will meet me. God will let me look in triumph on my enemies. Kill them not, lest my people forget. Make them totter by your power and bring them down, O Lord, our shield. For the sins of their mouths, the words of their lips, sin of their mouths, the words of their lips, let them be trapped in their pride, for the cursing and lies that they utter. Consume them in wrath, consume them till they are no more, that they may know that God rules over Jacob to the ends of the earth. So David expresses confidence in God. He knows, while I am, pinned like a helpless little prey, you're up there laughing at them. Because they're nothing to you as far as strength or threat or power. So he says, you're my strength, and I'll watch for you because you're my fortress. A very, very prominent theme throughout the Psalms. I've already seen it several times, even in the few that we've looked through so far in this study. But this is an example of a psalm also that sort of does, and I say this reluctantly and respectfully, what we might instinctively view as going too far. If you understand what I mean. One of those that we seem to maybe stumble over as, how does this attitude fit in with, is this something that Jesus would pray? I'll put it that way. Let them be trapped in their pride, consume them till they are no more. Yes, in verse 11 he says, kill them not, but it's more of, don't make it a quick end. Make an example. Yeah, sort of, yeah. And, there's not really much else to say about that except for the idea is, evil. The evil in the world. There's no place for it. And there's no tolerance, should be no tolerance for it. And God has at times made examples of people for the evil that they did. And it worked. It works. Think of Uzzah and the Ark of the Covenant. Did God just really hate Uzzah and he just couldn't wait for an opportunity to strike him down? No. But Uzzah did something that God said don't do, that bears the death penalty. He did it. Boom, he's dead. Guess what? How many more people touched the ark after that? 0. Nadab and Abihu, Moses' sons. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, humble them. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that certainly is a very upright, and I would call that the most ideal of all possible outcomes, is that the evildoers will be brought to a place where they then can turn, and repent and be humbled. It seemed the language sort of goes a step farther than that, and consuming them in God's wrath. In other words, as time went on, there was still maybe a wrathful view of evil, but the cry became more like that. What Wes just said, that the evil people will stop being evil. Kill the evil. Kill the old man, like Paul would even say. Kill the old self. Put the old to death. Cast him off. Put on the new man. Whereas in the Old Testament, in this kind of context, it's more of evil people. Get rid of them. But at any rate, that has partly to do with the times, and partly to do with the personal situation. But look at the main goal, objective. Regardless of how he expresses it, the main objective here is so that they will know. How can they know it if they've been consumed in God's wrath and till they're no more? Well, they being the nations, all the world will know that God rules over Jacob. Wait a minute. What in the world has Jacob got to do with anything? Was that a typo or a Freudian slip? Jacob's been dead for how many years? Okay, yeah, exactly. Jacob is Israel. And it's not very often that the people of Israel are called Jacob. They're called Israel. And we think of them as Israel, but we have to remember what's Israel? Well, Israel's Jacob's other name. So every now and then you'll see Israel called Jacob, and sometimes even Ephraim in that way, and by those names. It all refers to the same people, the people of Israel, the children of Israel, which are the children of Jacob. So yeah, verse 13 just means Israel. They rule over, but he rules over Israel to the ends of the earth. He really rules over all. So that's sort of like what Daniel said on, declared that, or I guess God declared to Daniel that, make them know. This is going to happen so that they will know that Jehovah rules over the kingdoms of men and sets over it whoever he wills. That is that should be the underlying, dream and wish and cry of all of God's people, all in time, throughout time, including today, that the world may know that God rules. He reigns. The God, the one true God. And that he sent his Son to die for the sins of that world. And that is what he is glorified. He is glorified in nothing more than that, for sure. Okay, he goes on then, says, each evening they come back. Howling like dogs and prowling about the city. They wander about for food and growl if they don't get their fill. But I will sing of your strength. I will sing aloud of your steadfast love in the morning. For you have been to me a fortress and a refuge in the day of my distress. O my strength, I will sing praises to you. For you, O God, are my fortress, the God who shows me steadfast love. So, even in spite of his current or then current plight, danger, he praises God. Again, kind of reminds of Jonah, who we talked about last week. How in the belly of that fish, he prays to God, not for deliverance, but he's praising God. He understood that God is God and that, he already had delivered him in a way. Delivered him from the sea, at least. And next up would be delivering him from the fish. So even, you could say, David was in the belly of that fish at this moment, or at the moment he's referring to, trapped in his house with men ready to kill him when he comes out. It's got to come out sometime. And as soon as he does, they're going to kill him. And yet he says, even though, and by the way, he does escape, but even after that, his life was not safe. But he was still in danger, and I think that's probably the other things he's referring to. And then he just opens it up even bigger in scope of just the nations at large and all evil people. Because David is not the only one ever to have wicked men lying in wait for him for no reason except evil and hate. So he's making it bigger than himself, which is another, sign of humility in itself. It's not just about me. But all those who are suffering at the hands of evil men. Put an end to it. You're my strength. I will sing of your steadfast love in the morning, because you're my fortress and refuge. Now, very quickly, what ended up happening? Well, make of it what you will. Michal decided to help a little bit. She took a statue of some kind. Interestingly, the Hebrew word there in 1 Samuel 19:13 is teraphim. And if you remember, we just talked about the word teraphim last week with the household gods that Rachel took. But this one may have been a little larger, seems. But she took it, laid it in the bed in David's place, put some goat's hair attached to it some way to look like David's hair, or human hair at least, covered it with clothes, I guess called out to the messengers and said, he's sick. So then Saul says, just bring the whole bed to me so that I'll kill him. And when they came in, they discovered David wasn't in that bed. They didn't know where he was, but he wasn't in that bed because she helped David escape through the window secretly, snuck out, and ran away. So guess what? God did deliver David. Not exactly the way that he may have thought. Not in a huge, blockbuster kind of display like, when the men came for Elijah, when Elijah was in that cave and the 50 men were out there and he calls down fire, consumed all 50 of them. And then another 50 come, he consumed all 50 of them. Maybe David had something like that in mind, That was later than this, but, that kind of divine display. But this is how he was freed. Yeah, Dean?
Well, the thing is, God always used that hand.
Mm-hmm.
And just at that time, she was there. So he just used her. I mean, God, sometimes is whatever is available at the time. And he knows what they can do. Because he's in control of things. And like I said, he wants us to do our part. Yeah, God is going to deliver us, but we got to do some things too to help him to deliver us.
Yeah.
We can't just sit there and say, okay, God deliver us, and do nothing. No, he has something to do.
Yeah. And, I want to go ahead and clarify. I'm not suggesting that God instructed Michal to lie to the men, or that he providentially led her to lie to the men. But God is always able to take even the feeblest effort and turn them to his purposes. So, God, there was a chance that this plan would not have worked, but it did work. And David is, again, probably in hindsight, in retrospect, praising God for that. Even though he was still in danger, he may have written this, or at least in his head, the sentiments of this when he was still in danger. Later, because it went on. That when 1 Samuel 19:10 was the beginning of somewhere between a 5 to 10 year exile for David. He was running away from Saul for maybe as long as a decade. Beginning that night, he couldn't be around Saul anymore because Saul's only thought was to kill him. So for 5 to 10 years, he was in similar danger. But here is what he wrote, which is kind of a lesson in itself, as I'll point out in just a second. Number 1, applications. David's petition in Psalm 59 illustrates what we can do when facing difficult situations in life. He didn't ask for special treatment per se. He, like I said, if he had done something to deserve this, if he had killed somebody, or otherwise, struck the king or anything that would make sense for the king's men to come for him, he wouldn't have been saying, God, help me. Why is this happening? Because he did something that would have justified that. But he hadn't. So he also, as I already pointed out, wasn't selfish. He opened this up to really anybody who's in a similar situation as he is, and viewed it just as despicably as when he's the one in the spotlight. Number 2, knowing the strength of God, David had no doubt about his ability to prevail over his persecutors. Even the strongest, most intimidating, most powerful men are like ants to God. So David knew that, and there was nothing that could keep God from fulfilling his will. And guess what part of his will was, in this specific case, to make David the next king? Well, guess what? If David's killed, David ain't going to be the next king, is he? So he knew that God's will would reign and overrule any of the plots of men. But that doesn't make it any less scary in the moment and stressful. Yeah, Dean?
Well, a couple times David had the opportunity to kill Saul.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that David knew that Saul, he's king, he was God's anointed. And that's why he would not kill Saul, because of the fact that God had anointed Saul as king. And so he wasn't going to be the one. He knew that God had already told Saul his kingdom was done. So,
Yep.
and it was God was the one that was going to do it. And I think David knew that.
David's character sure does shine in those instances when even his men were trying to encourage him, like, look, God's trying to tell you to kill him. You talk about a temptation, start, making you have second thoughts, like, hey, maybe they're right. What are the odds that this would be happening, and now it's happened again? David would not do it. Number 3, like David, we should openly praise God whenever he hears and answers our prayers. Here's the thing about this psalm being written in hindsight or in retrospect after the fact, is David is intentionally putting himself back in that state of mind. As opposed to, okay, I'm free now, thanks God, and then doesn't think another thing of it. Because that's kind of how we're inclined to be. Whenever we're in danger or sick or in some sort of distress, God pops into our mind. Because we think, hey, God can do something about it. I'll ask Him for help. And then whenever that distress or sickness or whatever is over, next time we don't think about God again until the next time we're in distress or sickness. But David he has been delivered from that peril, and yet, sometime after the fact, and again, I'm just assuming that it just doesn't seem very probable that he sat down and wrote it that night, but probably, looking back on it, he puts himself back in the mindset of that danger, remembers the bad to thank God in hindsight. So it's just a perspective. I'm not just thinking of God whenever I'm in danger, but I'm intentionally reflecting back on the time when I was in danger, even though I'm not now, and thanking God for His power and strength and deliverance. Psalm 100 verses 4 and 5 says, "Enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him. Bless His name, for Jehovah is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and His faithfulness to all generations." That should be our attitude, and ideally the attitude that brings us here. Enter His gates with thanksgiving. Sure, we ask things, we petition God, but let us never forget the thanks and the praise and the glory because of His faithfulness and steadfast love. And in nothing is His steadfast love shown or seen more than in Jesus coming to this earth and giving His whole life for our sins.